Deadlines. We've all got them, right? For work, for school, for paying that bill you've been putting off. They're literally everywhere. But have you ever stopped to think about what the actual rules are? Like the legal rules that kick in when you agree to one? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today.
I mean, of course you have. Every single time you sign a contract, take out a loan, or even just promise a friend you'll pay them back by Friday, you're stepping into a world that has its own, very specific playbook. So let's open it up.
All right, so in the legal world, a deadline is called a plazo. And the definition is actually pretty simple, but it's super powerful. It's some event in the future that is certain to happen. And when it does, it either starts an obligation or poof, it ends one. For our purposes, just picture it as the contract's official ticking clock.
Okay, so you've got this clock, right? But before it can even start ticking down, somebody has to set the time. And it turns out there are a few different ways that can happen.
A deadline can be set in one of three ways. The one we all know is conventional. That's just you and the other person agreeing on a date. Easy enough. But sometimes the law itself steps in and sets deadlines for certain things, to keep it all fair. And in some really rare cases, if an agreement is just way too vague, a judge can actually come in and set a deadline that makes sense.
And this is where things get kind of interesting. A deadline has to be certain to happen, but that doesn't mean we always know the exact date. A determined deadline is the simple one. Pay me by August 19th. We all get that. But an indeterminate deadline, this is tied to an event we know for sure is going to happen, we just don't know when. A classic example is the death of a person. It's absolutely certain to happen, which means legally it's a perfectly valid deadline. Okay, so the clock is set. But how you read that clock, how you actually count the days, this is absolutely crucial. And trust me, the rules might not be what you think they are.
So check this out. If you and I make a deal for a 10-day deadline and we don't specify anything else, the law assumes we mean 10 common days. That's right, calendar days. Weekends, holidays, they all count against you. But if a deadline is set by the law or by a judge, the default flips to business days. Suddenly, you get to skip weekends and holidays. That little difference can be a total game changer.
Now here's a concept from the source material that just sounds wild. It talks about something called a plazo de mentiras, which translates to a fake deadline. What on earth could a fake deadline be?
It's what we call a grace period. And here's why it's considered fake. Unlike a real deadline, it doesn't actually stop the clock. Let's say your rent was due yesterday. Your landlord calls and says, "Hey, it's cool, I'll give you to Friday." That's a grace period. It's just goodwill. Legally, they could change their mind and demand the money right now because your real original deadline has already passed. The obligation is live and kicking.
All right, we've set the clock, we know how to count, but what about all that time in between, while we're all just waiting? Well, that waiting game has its own set of rules too.
And really, this is the whole point of having a deadline in the first place. Its number one job is to protect the person who owes something, the debtor. As long as that clock is still ticking, the creditor can't come knocking. They cannot legally demand you pay up. You have the right to use every single second you were given.
That sounds like some pretty solid protection, right? But is it ironclad? Are there any loopholes? Any situations where a creditor can just hit the fast forward button and make the deadline arrive early?
Oh yeah, there are. See, a deadline is basically built on trust. And if you break that trust, the rules change. If the debtor goes bankrupt, for example, the creditor can call the whole debt due immediately. Same thing if you put up your car as collateral, and then, oops, you total it through your own fault. And then there's the big one, the acceleration clause, something you agree to ahead of time.
And this is why all this legal stuff matters to pretty much all of us. You know all that fine print in your credit card or car loan agreement? I can almost guarantee you there's an acceleration clause hiding in there. It basically says if you miss one single payment, the bank doesn't have to wait around. They can accelerate the timeline and demand you pay the entire remaining balance right now.
So we've set the clock, we've counted the days, we've survived the waiting game. Now for the final moment. What actually happens when that alarm bell finally rings?
When a deadline arrives, it does one of two things. Most of the time, it's a suspensive deadline. Think of it like a green light.
The waiting is over, and the obligation is now officially on. The creditor can finally, legally, demand payment. But you can also have an extinctive deadline, and that's a giant red stop sign. Once that date hits, an ongoing obligation is just over. It's extinguished for good.
So, from who sets the time, to how you count the days, to knowing when someone can hit fast forward, that simple deadline is way more complicated than it looks, huh? It's all based on these rules of trust and fairness. And knowing these rules gives you a huge advantage. So, the next time you agree to a deadline, just ask yourself, am I counting calendar days or business days? Is there an acceleration clause in here? Do I know exactly whose clock I'm on?